врешь, нет у меня никакой
Как с
контроля.
матерью разговариваешь?
Да не мать она мне.
This is Leviathan, the 2014 Russian film by Andrei Zvyagintsev. It's a contemporary story of a man named Kolya, his friend who's a lawyer, his son, and his second wife, and the fight for their property, home, and family with a corrupt mayor, an allegory for the state and its people. Both men are irrational and overly emotional, especially when compared to the lawyer, who's younger and came from Moscow. Kolya feels impotent in front of his wife, his son, the police, and even the church. He represents what has been done to the people of Russia since the collapse of communism. Not really the best story to represent the nation. The film examines the notion of treating the state as sacred, that there is some divine order like there was in the Soviet Union, characterized by cults of personality and worshipping icons. It's something that still exists, and the government does have the full support of the Russian Orthodox Church, who bless them so that they will be protected. This kind of power is shown to be intoxicating, and not to be reckoned with, and that challenging it should be done carefully and often in retrospect. This all would seem quite political given the state funded over a third of the film, and that Russia has been very blatant in controlling what the public sees. But the history of film in the Soviet Union was actually defined by waves of censorship and retrospection. The decade following Stalin's death was called the Thaw. It meant a new age of expression, including the film Cranes Are Flying, which remains the only Russian film to win the Palme d'Or. This is followed by a period of high dissent and even higher clampdowns. Gorbachev would label it stagnation. There's a great film from 2008 called Stylyagi, meaning hipsters, that depicts how some young people would rebel during the thaw years. Wearing bright clothes and pretending to be American, the film also takes jabs at contemporary Russian fears of Western influence, a subject that has defined the post-Soviet years and brought about increased nationalism. Zvyagintsev is a post-Soviet philosopher. Kolya is a man with an overwhelming past and an unknown future, in a country where the new nobility feels more oppressive than he's brought up to expect. The conflict is immensely personal, because what's at stake is more than his home, it's his paternity. The idea that a man should provide for his family better than the generation before his did. But that's something he thinks about more than he actually does. In past generations, fathers would openly forge the bond. But Kolya takes more solace in brotherhood. This may come from the social phenomenon that siblings feel closer than any other grouping because they've grown up with the most similar surroundings and traumas. In Russia, this feeling was pretty much incessant. There was no sustained post-war consumerism. Women in Russia have historically not been given credit for the family's stability, and Zvyagintsev highlights their exclusion from power. The bleakness gets to be unrelenting. It starts to become clear that corruption can't be the sole cause of Kolya's woes, and thus not a huge concern for censorship. To explain a little better, it might be good to look back at the ending of Hipsters, to see how political commentary is really about the art of subtlety. See if you get what I mean. In 2012, Vladimir Putin's inauguration was essentially made for television. In one of the busiest cities in the world, the streets were shut down, all the parties involved were choreographed, and over 80 cameras broadcasted directly to several of the state-owned channels. Exemplifying Lenin's assertion that cinema is the most important medium, such framework has been built by a man named Konstantin Ernst, a producer, media manager, and CEO of Russia's Channel 1. He's responsible for most of Russia trusting Putin on Ukraine, keeping dissent out of the public eye, and producing movies and shows that compete with Hollywood imports and inspire nationalism. Zvyagintsev knows this, but he knows the world isn't watching those movies. He also knows that you can't just go out and discredit your country and not suffer the consequences. It'd be foolish to look at the grandeur of revolutions and think that there weren't compromises. It's true that the Kremlin may view his dissent as patriotic, and it's true that Zvyagintsev is not openly anti-Russian. But one has to understand his position is unprecedented for the 21st century. In a time when U.S. discourse jumps between ridicule and fear, the idea of saying something more nuanced is actually what's getting people's attention. And whether Zvyagintsev planned all this doesn't really matter. The point is that people were listening.
Бесед. У ребят то же самое было. Мы из зала в зал.
Stranger has come in the night, stolen her